Thank you, everyone, for joining Kingdom Heirs Wealth Chat Edition. Today, we're going to talk about transferring our wealth. This is Chad. I get to do life with him at Ohio, and I'm not the smartest person in the room, and so I have friends like Chad to come along to help. Now, Chad, I'm going to have you introduce yourself, and also the people that are on this live. They're investors.
Okay, great.
So they have some wealth to transfer. Let me get this person in. People are still coming in the room. So Chad, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great. My name's Chad Mays. I serve as the Senior Vice President of Consumer, Business, and Wealth Services at Ohio. I'm 30 years in the banking business, and really my focus for the last many years has been around wealth transfer and investment management.
Well, I just met you at January or the end of December.
Yeah.
Chad is bringing the wealth, and I may not be giving it the correct terms, but he's bringing that to the credit union. We didn't have that division before. And so I was talking to Chad, and so this is new for me. So I may not ask all the right questions, but I invited my friends that may also have questions. And so let's go ahead and get started. So why do we need a trust?
So a trust is really the document that keeps any of the assets that you have transferring over to whoever you want to transfer them to, however you want to transfer them. The reason people get trusts, the easier answer is why people often avoid getting a trust, because they think it's only for the wealthy people. It's really not. Getting a trust is designed so that, one, you can keep the transfer of your wealth private. It doesn't need to go through court or probate, as we call it. And it also gives you the opportunity to transition things, not just in one gift, but if you wanted to give a house and provide for it and keep it in the family for a number of years, you would do that by way of a trust. And so that you can make sure that all the things that you've worked hard for over the years are transitioned to the people that you want them, and how over time that you want it to happen.
Awesome. And which I think is neat. And just to share a little story, my grandfather and his father purchased over 100 acres of land. He had 11 siblings. So when my great grandfather passed away, there was other siblings. So they divvied up. So my grandfather left now it's down to 54 acres because they, built a road through it, and there's swampland there too, but still a good part of the land is there. But my father has 11 siblings. And so one passed away. He didn't have any children. And then my dad passed away. So that brought in my sister and I. So the circle was getting much larger. And so that was a concern for one of my aunts that stayed behind and took care of the land while everyone else dispersed and went to other states and cities to live. And then another aunt died and another uncle died. So then I understood, but explain how we could have done it. We ended up selling it to one of my uncles.
Okay.
And his family. He has about 5 children, so they now have the farm land. So
I would say there's a couple of core documents when you talk about wealth transfer. You'll hear it also called estate planning or wealth planning. And that's not really defined around a dollar, because it may not be cash, but in your case, farmland or other land. So the first document you have is a will. Everybody gets a will first. And a will says all the things that I have, this ring goes to this daughter and this watch goes to this son. And then the will provide for a clause that says everything else goes to trust. And inside the trust document is where you can have all the terms laid out of how you want that interest to be passed on to future generations. So for you, you could have just your ownership. Let's say it was 100 acres and there were 10 of you, just for easy math, and you would have roughly a 10% ownership in that. Your 10% ownership can be owned by that trust, just like a corporation, if you will, and be given, or the rights to it, or even if it was farmland, the value that comes out of it can be given to whoever you want, a charity, your family, anybody that you want in your trust. And you can do it over a period of time. You don't just have to say, here you go, you guys own it now. The trust own it's for the benefit of others. So those two documents generally come into play. The one that I will add that I think a lot of people overlook, the third document that we always talk about, is a healthcare power of attorney. Because in situations where you have a will, but maybe not a trust yet, but let's say you get really ill or you're in the hospital, have a surgery or something, and something needs to happen with that that document or that property, the healthcare power of attorney is the third one, because we always think about, well, transfer is when I die, right? I die and it's transferred. Well, there's some times where maybe just, like my grandfather had dementia for a long time, so he just couldn't manage his affairs. So you need that healthcare power of attorney as that third document of the three.
I definitely understand that because my mom, we had to do that for her. So I definitely understand that. Now, I was watching the other day, the owner of Chick-fil-A.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the father passed it to the son, and then the son did his tenure, and then he passed it on to his son. And so the question is, like, if my daughter were to get married
Mm-hmm.
and divorced,
Mm-hmm.
how does that work? I don't want them to sue her for something that belongs to her.
That's the great thing about a trust. It's actually not owned by your daughter. Let's say if the house, let's say it's a house, you wanted to give your home to your daughter, and then sometime later she got divorced. Your daughter doesn't own the home. The trust owns the home for the benefit of your daughter. So there is no claim that husband, current or ex or otherwise, could ever make against that property, because that's the reason they have it. That's the same kind of insulation that you would get from being a shareholder in a corporation. You don't really have ownership of it. You have you are do the rights from it. So anything that sort of is created, or the revenue or the ability to live in it, is all for your benefit, but it's actually owned by this third party. So there's no way to make a claim against that. So it does provide for marital disruptions, let's say.
Awesome. That's good to know, because that is a concern. And I think the first time we chatted, here I am building this business with the land and the property. I know that my daughter can take care of that, but I also have, you said you could put this ring goes here. We have a Facebook group. And so I always talk about 7 or 8 streams of income. So I have intellectual property. I have a book. I have the online social media where I generate revenue from it. And I know that that's something she does not want to be a part of. She's like, Mom, this is your thing. So that had me concerned, because I only have one child. And so she's complaining, hey, I don't want to do this. Okay, so why am I doing it? 58 years old. So why am I building this if you're not going to take over? But you explained that we could just skip right over her and go to the children.
You certainly could. That's the great thing about a trust document, or even a will, depending on how you want it to give the rights to intellectual rights, the rights to the online property and things like that. You give it to your grandchildren, you give it to charity, you can give it to a complete stranger if you want to. You can give it really to anybody that you want. You can also make some combination of that. So let's say the podcast is booming, it's gigantic, there's millions of dollars coming in off of the podcast. You can actually have the trust hire a company to manage it for you, but your daughter's still the owner, so she gets all the money, doesn't have to do any of the work. That's the best deal of all, right? So you just have to pay the management company to kind of keep that going. Same with the farmland, or the land. Maybe she doesn't want to get involved in land or cleaning it up or the taxes. You can hire somebody in the trust, like a bank, that will take care of all that business for you. They'll pay all the payments for you, and you pay them a fee to manage that for you. That's what trusts do after they're created over time. So you've heard the term trust officer. That's what trust officers are. There are people that get the trust documents from a family, and whatever the trust document says, it says the family home, keep it cleaned up, keep the property taxes paid, pay all the bills. They do all the trust officer takes care of all of that for them, for the benefit of whoever lives inside of that house. And that way you can keep it for generation to generation if you want to.
Now, is there an expiration date?
Depends on the state. Most states have expiration dates that are like 300 years. There's a few that go in perpetuity, very few, but it's generally over 100 years would be the lifespan. So normally a trust will last longer than intellectual property rights, which are generally 70 years, 75 years. So you'll generally your trust will outlive that. great thing about a trust, it's always designed no matter who's managing it. And that's why you typically get a bank, because you want a big company to kind of manage it. The best thing about that is they always have to do what's in your best interest, or in the trust's best interest. And so if it's coming due, that it's 70 years from now and that intellectual property rights are coming due, they might sell all that to create another cash windfall for you. They're not just going to let something expire, because they have to do what's best for you at all times. So it's a great tool, and one that's, like you said, often overlooked a lot of times.
And that explains why the Rockefeller money is still here and flowing,
right,
and taking care of family members. I'm going to open the floor. If you guys have any questions for Chad, please, by all means, unmute yourself and come on.
Could you tell me those 3 key documents again?
Yeah, so the 3 most important documents, the first 2 are tied together. It's a will. You'll hear it called a living will, or last will and testament. Those are all kind of the same names. That is just the basic document that says, when I pass away, pay all my creditors, pay all the people that I might owe money to. Here's where I want to be buried. Here is where I want grandma's ring to go to. All those kinds of things that are in the now, those now moment things. The second document is if you want any of your assets to live sort of beyond you into future years, where you would need a trust document. Often the will, the first document, they'll call it a pour over will, meaning all these things are inside of the will, and anything that's not named pours over into the trust. So then you'll have a trust document that will be, the nice thing about the trust document is comes in 2 flavors. The revocable trust, which is the kind that you can change and do anything you want to, or an irrevocable trust, which means once it's set, it's that way forever, can't change it. There's advantages and disadvantages. Maybe another conversation. We'll get to that one. And then the third document is the healthcare power of attorney, medical power of attorney. Sometimes I remember being a kid, my mom would always write my grandma a note that says, if Chad falls and breaks his leg, you can get him treated at the hospital. One of those kinds of notes. That's what's required if there's if somebody's in a coma. It's like, look, if I'm in a coma, I want my wife to never pull the plug, or I want my wife to always pull the plug. My wife is sitting in the room, so don't tell her anything that I said this. But so those are the 3 main documents that create a good estate plan.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add one while we're maybe waiting for the next question. One of the keys about having a trust, though, it's not just about creating the documents. A will is an extension of you. So a will is natural, but a trust document is actually a corporation in some ways. And so if the if the trust document or the trust itself does not own the property, it's not part of that corporation. For example, if I own a house and it's Chad Mays is the owner of the house, that falls through my will. If it's owned by the Chad Mays Trust, the trust owns it. And so when I pass away, the trust will continue on that ownership of that chain. So just like your bank accounts, often we'll see people that have CDs and things, they'll open their bank accounts, their CDs, in the name of the Chad Mays Trust, because the trust then owns them, and then there's no ambiguity. If you just leave it with a will, which is fine for a lot of people, if you just leave that first document and don't have a trust but just a will, it will necessarily be probated, which is a court procedure, which means all of your information and assets would become public information for anybody to view. So generally, a lot of people like to be a little more private, so they take that will, they pour over everything else into the trust, and then the trust takes it kind of in private, like a private company.
Okay, so everyone in the audience, we have rental properties.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that when we purchase these properties, to just go ahead and put it under the trust name, then so we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, the easiest one to do, the advice that I would give, and my wife and I are in that same sort of situation, it's probably because there's a lot of risk possibilities with owning property, slip and falls, people crashing. You never know what could happen. We generally would recommend to have a rental property held by an LLC, own it by the LLC, but the LLC itself doesn't need to be owned by a human. The LLC can be owned by the trust. Okay. So the trust is like an umbrella, and then you have all these LLCs that are sitting under it. That way, everything is sort of protected. individually. And then if you pass away or you just don't want to manage it anymore, all of that's already in the trust, so the trust can take over too. So it's kind of a double layer there for you.
Now, of course, we have access to the internet. And so, I mean, I don't keep on it 100%. So if anyone in the audience does, where they're saying now, if you pass down a house to a family member and I bought it for 50,000 and now it's worth 100,000, that they would have to pay the tax. I mean, you're saying the trust would avoid that?
Yeah, so there's something called a step up in basis. Basis is what you bought it for. So if you bought the house for $50,000, upon your death, there's a step up in basis. So the property would be evaluated or revalued at the date of your death. And that would be the inherited basis to your daughter. So if you had a house for $50,000, it's worth $500,000 now. The $500,000 would be the stepped up basis that she would inherit if you gave it to her. Inside of the trust, that kind of becomes irrelevant because the trust already owns it. So it doesn't matter if it's 50, 500. It's like if a CEO changes in a company, the company is still the company, right? It's still all those things are inside of there. But same would apply for stocks and bonds. If you bought Facebook stock at $10 when it first came out, and now it's worth,
We bought it for 30.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. And now it's worth 300 or whatever. It's some crazy number.
It was.
That's the same rules apply. So you have that basis, and so when you pass away, you get a one-time step up in basis to transition that. So if you gave it all, let's say all of that stock to your daughter, she would get it at the new price. So her basis would be the date that you passed. Just like she bought it brand new on that day. So all of that income below that would be, or that growth would be free to her in many ways.
Okay. Now, the other thing is,
Renee, before you leave trust, I have a question. I have 3 properties that are in a trust, and the beneficiary of the trust is the LLC, but the LLC does not own the 3 properties that are in the trust. So is that wrong? Have I not set that up properly?
Yeah, it'd be difficult for the LLC to be the beneficiary of the trust because it would depend on who runs that LLC when you pass, right? So somebody would have to take that action. The most common way that you see it, that would probably provide 99.5% of all the protections out there, unless we're dealing with billionaire families, that becomes a little quirkier. But it would be have each property and its own LLC would be the most secure way. Maybe the second most secure way would be have an LLC with all your properties in it, but at least you have one, and then have your trust own the LLC. If you have the properties named into your trust, the reason that provides you a little bit of risk is because while you're living, that trust is still you and you are still that trust. So for example, a slip and fall or anything like that, you are that trust and that trust is you while you're living. It only becomes a thing after you pass. And so the best way to do it is to structure it again. The trust as the umbrella that owns particular LLCs, and those LLCs own the property. That would be the most common and most protective way to do it.
Okay, so I guess I'm confused by the term that the trust would own the LLCs instead of the LLC being the beneficiary. So there's a difference there, you're saying.
Yeah, the LLC can, so an LLC as a company, there's not really it's not like a bank account where there is a true beneficiary. So an LLC can have, it's a company. Companies don't have traditionally beneficiaries. If you sold out of that position, whoever the owner of the LLC, the named owner of the LLC, would be responsible for those taxes and that ownership. So that's why we would recommend, versus that being you or anything built in there, that you would be your trust. It's still you and your complete control, but we'd rather see that on the top layer. And then so when you form an LLC, you have the member or managing member, depending on how you structure it. That name would not be your name; it would be the trust name, which is still you. I mean, it's still your social and still your responsibility while you're alive. But that would be the actual owner of the LLC or the member.
does that make sense to you, Teal? And she's driving, so.
And sometimes terminology gets in the way because in different states they call things differently. I'm happy to, if anybody'd like to chat with me further about this. I do have some some graphics that I can share that we, have some sample like estate planning structures, like they're like simple PowerPoint pages, but then you can kind of see why. And I think it gives some words behind why that's the most important structure to have, both now and then in the future.
And I can incorporate them.
Okay, great.
Edit right into the video. Now, Mike, I don't know who else is on there. Pam, if you have any questions, please jump in. I know.
So it's kind of clear to me, but I think I need to go back and revisit the way that I'm doing it.
And Chad is local. He's in Columbus. So matter of fact, I was like, Mike wasn't sure he could make it. I was like, you know what, Mike, we can just come by the office. So we have a group of investors that we get together and we play the cash flow game weekly. And so.
And there's kind of two sides to a trust document. There's to develop one, that's a lawyer, right? Lawyers create the documents, but then the other side is what banks do, which is a trust officer. So after, you turn it over, you pass away, somebody's got to manage that, the trust officer. That's where banks do. And so if you wanted to, it's a long way around to say, so in coming to the office, we actually have trust officers that would say, if you had these documents, here would be the best way, because that actual person on behalf of the bank or credit union is the one that's going to manage your assets for you going forward. So it'd be important to talk to that person and say, if something happens to me, what are you going to do with the land? What are you going to do with the house? And they would say, based on what your document says here, this is what I would do. And if you say, great, it's great. And if you say, wait a minute, that's really wrong, then we go back to the attorney and make some new words into it, make sure that it gets right.
Okay, definitely got to structure that exactly how you want it so they could follow through on your instructions. I know Rashana had a question. Her childhood condo, I gave it to her. Well, I want to give it to her. She graduated from college, but so we're just learning her process. So whether we should wait until I'm gone or how to transfer that property over to her. Yeah.
And so there's obviously a lot of ways to do that. There's the gift way, which you can gift it to anybody, and you're provided a lifetime gift amount. It's around $5 million. So you can gift up to $5 million worth of stuff for the rest of your life, and you don't have to pay taxes on it. So if you want to gift that and the condo's not worth $5 million or more, then you're in good shape. You can just kind of gift that away. But in the trust and estate planning world, sometimes you need to separate use and ownership. So sometimes it might make more sense if you and your daughter formed an LLC together, right? And the house or the condo was owned by the LLC. Then at some point something happens to you pass and you pass it all on to your daughter. She slides in and she's the owner, but that LLC gives her some layer of protection against neighbors, slips and falls, things like that. So that's the difference between owning anything in your name personally and owning it through a company. An LLC is a limited liability company for that reason, limited liability.
Well, it is under LLC. It's under R&R Investments. That's the name of the company. And but her name is not on the paperwork. But I did reach out to my attorney. I'm like, okay, can I add her on because she is the other R? So he told me to check with an accountant first. But she really is the R&R piece of it. So I'm glad to hear that I can gift it. We just have to, she graduated about a year ago, 2 years now. So
I'm sorry, some people do it through their trust. So they'll say that LLC owned by the trust, when I pass away, that interest of that LLC, I want gifted to my daughter. So then at that time, she owns it all, but you get that basis step up. So that tax situation becomes a little bit cleaner at that time. So there's so many ways to do that. Just depends on your timing and when you want it.
Awesome. You guys, I'm going to open the floor again. If you have any questions, Chad is here. I know we see a lot of videos online, and of course, they don't give you all the details. And so this is Chad's profession, and he's the expert. And so thank you, Chad, for doing this for me. So if you have any questions, feel free to chime in.
I have a question. So as far as your generational wealth goes, and how Renee mentioned, things get passed down. would you say that the person that is getting passed down to, whether it's their child, grandchildren, do they need to have some type of form of financial literacy? Or, is that trust option that you said where they can handle everything and they just get paid to do nothing? Like, what would you say in that type of term of, do they need to know some type of financial literacy when they're getting passed down things from their parents, grandparents, whatever it may be?
I think financial literacy is really important, especially in the best time to do it is when all parties are still with us, right? Because financial literacy means different things to different people. And there's also values that are inherited into that. So some people take property like, I don't care, it's a house, sell it, buy it, whatever. Some people think that's our family home. Please don't ever sell that. And so there's some values that go inside of that. So it would be important to understand from all parties what would be built in there. In the trust, as you mentioned, you can put very exotic things. We used to have one that we affectionately called the beach bum clause. And the beach bum clause would say for all of these California surfers, and they would say, well, my family's rich, I'm just going to get a paycheck. The trust document actually says, to the extent my son earns a paycheck, we'll match that dollar to him. He doesn't earn, he doesn't get paid, right? You can do things like that. College graduates, my wife and I have in ours that if our kids go to college, we'll pay for them to go to college, things like that. But if they don't go to college, they're going to wait to inherit anything if I'm not here until maybe they're 30 years old, because I want to make sure that they're ready for it. The worst thing that we can do is transition any kind of wealth without financial literacy. In our profession, they call it shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations. You can look that up, shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations. That means generation 1 builds it, generation 2 maintains it, generation 3 runs the money out. And so it's gone. And so there's a statistic, it's like 80% of all inherited wealth falls into that 3 generation thing. What we found, the ways to stop that is exactly what you're saying, is to have some financial literacy and some understanding of what it is and the values that built it, and to maintain those values, from generations forward.
And I'll just mention one thing and we'll go ahead and close if you guys don't have any questions. But I was looking at an article from Forbes, and it was saying that the young wealthy are stressed about generational wealth. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, it's so before coming to Ohio, my role was to manage the family dynamic for these very wealthy families. And very wealthy, in our definition, means if you didn't have $10 million in an account somewhere, you probably weren't working with us. So we were 10 million to billionaires, right? So very wealthy families. And so that was probably the most common thing that we saw was that next generation. They were either nervous or people were buying the fancy shoes and cars and ready to spend it, right? Back to that spend style. But those that really wanted to carry on that tradition and that business and all the things that either their parents or grandparents built, they were nervous about it. And so truly financial, it starts with literacy, but then financial education is really, really important. Part of what a trust officer's job to do is not to manage this wealth for you in perpetuity. Hopefully what they're doing is getting you ready and then your kids ready, and then kind of build it out so it's someday that you can manage it just like any other business. But it's a challenge, right? There's a whole lot of information out there, and frankly there's a lot of misinformation out there. The biggest things that you can do is get the documents right and get it all structured, because we don't ever want to see anybody lose it in a divorce or in a tax situation or something crazy out there. And then the other element of is try to begin to set plans out there that you want to see, what I want to have this done with this property or this business in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And if we stop thinking about the now, a little that pressure comes down, because if you don't do anything today with that condo that you inherit, it's still going to be there tomorrow, likely, right? Or say we'll work it out. So give it a little bit of time, and then sometimes with that financial education, those come together. That's what we used to commonly see in the younger generations inheriting wealth. It was absolutely just, I don't know what I don't know, and that's frightening.
Now, one thing, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Culturally, I don't think we you're saying that there was a money cap to even be able to do trust. And so you're saying now the door is open to whereas, anyone can do it. You don't have to have money of Rockefeller. And so, I just, we sell grandma's house, or we lose grandma's house.
Sure.
And so the educational piece is real important to me because the way that we are going into the future, if you don't build something outside of your jobs, and you're going to be poor. Sure. I mean, so if you could just, even share something there on, I don't know what the statistics are for different ethnic groups taking part in trust. Do you see more of that happening?
Yeah, it becomes less maybe ethnic and a little bit more urban and rural. It seems like a lot of families that are, suburb families like my wife and I are, or you're out in the kind of more rural areas, or you're not surrounded by lawyers every day, things like that, tend to not think about these kinds of things we're talking about. And it seems to be more that is the most common driver to this. But I would say for wills, there is no, I mean, you can have, I own one blanket and I live outside, and that's the only thing I'm willing. You can leave that in your will. It's your one thing, right? A trust also doesn't require any dollar limit on it. Sometimes it's just based on the relationship. Sometimes if you have, husband and wife, or, maybe remarried, and you have a couple sets of children on both sides, that's complex. And so that may need a trust, whether you have a lot of money or not. And so the notion that you have to be really rich to have a trust, it's completely sort of gone. Ohio will take a look at a trust just about for anybody at any size, and we'll help you manage it. That's what we think the best thing to do for communities are, and especially it gives us an opportunity to provide some of that financial literacy, because as that wealth is being transferred, we get a chance to say, here's what we're doing, and here's what your mom's trust said to do, but here's why we're doing it, and here's the tax ramifications if we don't do it, and so it gives us that opportunity to say not only the what but the why, and we think that that's really what part of our job is to help everybody kind of get that understanding of what's going on, so it's like not a shock and it's not scary. It's like, okay, I know why they're doing that. I think that just makes everybody feel better in the long run.
Okay, and again, before we close out, everyone, again, I don't want to miss anyone's questions that you may have for Chad. And then Chad, I'm gonna have you tell everyone how to get in contact with you and close us out with your favorite quote or your favorite, because Derek didn't have quotes, he needs quotes. So whatever message that you would like to leave us with.
I got a question for Chad.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you for doing this, Renee. This is on my to-do list, and it's been on there for a while, and I haven't got it done. If I want to set up a trust, I have several properties. What kind of fee is involved in doing that?
Yeah, so generally a trust package, and when I mean trust package, it will be those three main documents: a will, a trust, and a healthcare power of attorney. Those three documents will come. Lawyers range in that space depending on how simplified you want to go to some of these clauses, like the beach bum clause that I mentioned, and some crazy things. You can go anywhere from maybe $1,000 to $20,000 for the fee for the lawyer to draft all of those documents. The good news, maybe even better news, is for many situations, and maybe probably 75% of situations, there are online resources for this. So you can actually go to, I'm not endorsing, but like illegalzoom.com, they have very basic will and trust templates out there that at least would be something, right? So in the absence of getting that done with an attorney, or you say, look, I'm not ready to do that, or I don't have the money, I want to do that later, whatever. Those documents you can get for, very nominal fee. It kind of walks you how to fill those out. You get them signed, and then at least you got something. So if something happened, they talk about the hit by the bus situation. If that happened, at least those documents are there. So a lot of different ways to kind of get there. And then I will say, trust documents are also an extension of you. And so it's not a one and done, just like a will. Just you have grandma's ring today, maybe you buy 10 more grandma's rings. By the time you pass away, you'll need to add things back in there. So these documents will need to be reviewed and refreshed maybe every couple of years or so. Doesn't really cost that much, just add a few things, if the laws change, make sure it's added in there. But it's definitely something you want to sort of stay on top of, make it like a New Year's sort of thing or something.
All right, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Well, I thank you guys for joining me. We can definitely do more of these types of videos. I just, like I said, I do have people that I can call and say, hey, we need help with this, and definitely invite them. Because again, I get to see Chad once a month.
Yeah.
And he drives up in his, what is it, BMW? And I park next to him in my little Beetle.
Taking suggestions on future topics. I would be interested in the conversation around the difference between the revocable trust and the irrevocable trust.
Okay, Chad's going to tell you how to get in contact with him. Like I said, he's local.
Yeah, so you can certainly contact me anytime at Telhio Credit Union. My name again is spelled Chad, CHAD dot Maze, M-A-Z-E, like the puzzle, not the corn, Maze, at Telhio, TELHIO.org. I'll leave you my phone number if anybody would like to call directly. My telephone number is 614-221-3233, and I'm at extension 8215. That comes directly to me. And I'll be happy to assist anybody that's either on the call, or if you have somebody that would like to touch base, or for even discussing the irrevocable, revocable sort of elements. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I can provide you some documents and some slides that talk about those in general. Again, the idea of every trust and every will is that it's unique to you. But these will kind of give you that basic, almost like blueprints. It'll give you the blueprints. It won't be like living in your own home, but at least you'll know what it's kind of going to look like when it's all done.
The favorite quote or endings, something you want to share to end the call?
Well, I just, maybe not a quote, but I would just say that I think this is a really important topic. It's both personal to me, it's personal to many people. I think it's one of those that people often overlook. And so the more people that can see something like this or have those conversations, I often say it's not about the people on this call, right? It's about your kids and your grandkids, that if we don't do these things right, they're the ones that have to fix and pay for this stuff. And I just, for me, I just don't want that. I'm sure for many of you, you don't want that kind of thing either. So it's just a really important sort of passion topic for me. So I appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you guys.
Thank you so much. And you guys, I'll talk to you later. And thank you for joining us here at Kingdom Heirs. Bye.